Good morning, Reptilians. Welcome and welcome back to the channel. I'm Elle and this is Elle's Reptiles. This week we are talking about just like some outdated care guidelines, basically changes that I have made to my care routine of the reptiles since keeping reptiles. This is kind of like a carrying on from last week's video of just changes that I wanted to make. I'm gonna just jump right into this one, I think. Before we get started, this video is sponsored by iHeartGeckos, so make sure to stay until the end of the video to find out all about this awesome company. Let's get started. Okay, so the first huge thing that's very obvious every time you look at a video, the first huge change that I've made since I began keeping reptiles is enclosure sizes. So when I first started keeping reptiles, it was before all the reptile zoos existed and when breeders were still keeping ball pythons in like bins and things. And so I thought I was doing so good keeping my ball pythons in 40-gallon tanks, and the ball pythons were in 40-gallon tanks. Zaz was in a 40-gallon tall tank, so it wasn't actually 40 gallons. I think it was like 60 or 70 something gallons, I don't know, but it was still 36 by 18 length and width. Dexter was a baby, so she was in a 12 by 12 by 18. Morty was also in a 18 by 36 enclosure, and I thought that he was going to stay in that for forever. So the first huge change that I've made is just enclosure sizes. We have huge 6-foot tanks now. We have the crested gecko in an 18 by 18 by 36. We have 4-foot tanks in here now. We have so many huge tanks, and this year I plan to upgrade Morgan's tank as well, my little baby crested gecko, and I plan to continue to upgrade tanks. That is one of the reasons that I'm not getting any new animals. Morgan I got last year? I think so. I think the beginning of last year. No, the year before last. I don't remember. Osiris, the hognose up here, I think I got 2 years ago, maybe. But they're the last ones. I don't plan to get any more because I need to make sure that I have space for these guys to have enough space. That's just a huge change that I made that I did not see myself doing when I first started this channel. I never in a million years thought I'd have a bunch of 6-foot tanks for them. And here we are. The next big change that I made is having heat pads as a #1 go-to heating source, or I guess not having them as a #1 go-to heating source. So when I first started, I had all the snakes that I had and my leopard geckos, all those animals they had heat pads as their #1 go-to heating source, and I loved heat pads on thermostats, of course, but that was my #1 go-to, and I have since changed my thoughts on that. I still like heat pads, and I still love heat pads on thermostats, but generally as a secondary heat source instead of a primary heat source. Now I'm using deep heat projectors or just straight up heat bulbs, and they work really nicely. One of the huge reasons for that is because I have changed to these PVC tanks, and you can't really put a heat pad under a PVC tank. You can kind of set it up to where it goes inside. Then you have like a whole issue with the thermostat and the tape and the animal scales, and I didn't want to deal with that, so I just switched over. I was very nervous about switching over, but I'm so happy that I did, especially the deep heat projectors. I love those so much, and I am very fully advocating that a lot of my animals started eating so much better once I set up those deep heat projectors. But I do still use heat pads, like I said, as a secondary heat source. So for my crested gecko, garo gecko, baby crested gecko, and the crocodile skink, they all have heat pads that they use primarily during the winter. The crocodile skink actually still does use a heat pad for her primary heat source just because she does hide so much, and that way her hiding spot can always be warm, just because that works better for her. But for the rest, they all use heat pads in the wintertime as a secondary heating source in the wintertime, because in the summer they generally don't need heat because I live in Alabama, it gets very hot here. They don't need those heat sources in the summertime. I always hook up heat pads on thermostats just to make sure that they don't get too cold. The next one is my stance on loose substrates. So when I first started, you guys may remember if you've been around for a long time, I had tile in most of my tanks. Actually, I think when I very first started, I had turf, artificial turf, because I had recently gone from carpet once I learned about the dangers of carpet for things like bearded dragons, leopard geckos, and I had moved to artificial turf and tile. I was like super big for tile and not having loose substrates, and then as time went on and as more research came out, or I guess as I found more and more research, I have since switched my stance on that after learning that impaction generally happens with loose substrates if the rest of the environmental situation isn't correct. And learning that and slowly switching my reptiles to loose substrates definitely helped so much. A slow transition was very much needed to basically convince me that it was okay, because I had read so many things and seen so many things about the absolute dangers of all loose substrates, and I just don't feel that way anymore. I'm still super against calcium sand, but as for organic topsoils and repti soils, even soil mixtures with children's play sand in it, anything like that, love it. I think every single one of the reptiles, yeah, every single one of the reptiles in this room is on loose substrate, and it makes me feel much better about it. They dig in it, they crawl around in it, a lot of them will burrow into it. It just feels better and it feels more natural, and I am so happy that I made that switch. I did not see myself being here when I first started this channel, and I was like super pro tile, but here we are. In that same realm of thinking, the animals that I've always had on loose substrates, primarily snakes, I have changed the types of loose substrate that they were on. So when I first got my corn snake, which is actually, can you see him? There he is. When I first got him, he was on aspen. When I first got king snake, he was on aspen. When I first got the ball pythons, they were on aspen. And I have since very much changed my thought process on that. When I first switched the ball pythons from aspen to something better, I actually had them on cypress mulch. So splintery. Do not suggest it. No. It hurts. It hurts to change it. You get splinters. Now, I think every single one of the animals in this room are on some form of organic topsoil mixture, depending on what kind they are. Some have more play sand in that topsoil mixture. Some also have repti soil in that topsoil mixture, but they are all on some sort of just organic topsoil mixture, which is so much cheaper than buying reptile soils, but also it is okay. Everyone's okay. Before, when I had the corn snake on aspen, he loves his water bowl. It's always dirty because he goes in and out of it so much, because he's always done that. He's always loved his water bowl. When he was on aspen and he did that, the aspen was always sopping wet. That was one of the huge reasons that I decided that he needed to be on something else. And that kind of just goes with all of them. Normal topsoil looks better. It holds moisture better. I don't think aspen is meant to hold moisture at all. It's meant to collect moisture so you can dispose of it, but not to hold moisture for humidity, if that makes sense. And the last thing that I do now, that I didn't when I very first started keeping reptiles, is always doing an initial vet visit. The first few reptiles I got, I did not do an initial vet visit, and I definitely should have. Initial vet visits literally can save your animal's life. I have had an animal pass away because I did not do an initial vet visit, because I didn't know. I just didn't know that's what I needed to do. And now everything's good. This crocodile skink that's over here, we thought that she was a captive bred animal when we got her. It turns out that she was wild caught, but we only knew that because we did an initial vet visit and they found the 3 or 4 different types of internal parasites that she had and were able to treat her quickly, and she's doing great. She would not have been doing great without that initial vet visit. So anytime I get a new animal, even if I know that that animal came from a good breeder or I know where they came from, I always do an initial vet visit just to clear them of parasites, to help me not worry, because again, I've been in that situation before where I didn't know an animal was sick when I got them and they did unfortunately pass away, and now I just have this panic this sense of I need to make sure, or else I'll just worry for the next 3 months. So I always do that. Highly recommend always doing that if you get a new animal, but that is definitely something that I'm so happy. That is a change that I'm so incredibly happy to have made since starting this reptile journey. But that is it. That is all I have for this week's video. I'm sure there's a whole bunch more changes that I've made, but these are just the 5 that I thought of off the top of my head and that made it to this video. Let me know in the comments below what changes you have made since keeping reptiles and how that's working out for you. Let me know. It'll teach me, or it'll teach the other people that read the comments. Thank you so much for doing that. As I said in this video is sponsored by iHeartGeckos. iHeartGeckos is an awesome company that makes conversion kits for tanks. These can be just old tanks you have laying around. Super easy to install. Put a line of silicone all around that rim, press the conversion kit in, and let it completely dry out. Make sure that silicone smell is gone, and you have a front opening tank for your critter. Make sure if you do order one of these from iHeartGeckos.com, you leave Elle's Reptiles in the How Did You Hear About Us box. That way they know that you guys are coming from here. Thank you so much to iHeartGeckos for sponsoring this video. As always, if you haven't already, please feel free to follow me on socials, like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications every single time I put out a new video, which is some Sundays, and sometimes I do shorts on Wednesdays. This week's Instagram shoutout is here, and the subscribe shoutout is here. Thanks so much for liking, following, subscribing, and commenting, and sharing, and all that jazz. You are the bee's knees. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye. the first huge change that I made since the first huge change that